The Business Agility Institute Brazil is a community of people who want to help creating the next generation of organizations. That is our purpose. Here in Brazil, we started our activities holding meetups on business agility and other related topics. We were officially born as a community on May 5th, 2020, when we held our first kickoff meeting and shared with all the volunteers our dreams, our vision of future, and our idea about our internal organization in nucleus of work. The nucleus of work are teams that also have a purpose. Volunteers can get to know what each nucleus means on our intranet and can choose the nucleus they want to be part of. Now we are going to tell you a little bit about the possibility of relating to the Institute of Brazil. You can be a volunteer and act in the nucleus team we just shared with you. You can be a corporate member and have your company participating in our global and regional events, executive forums, access our content library, participating in our learning and communication incubators, and several other initiatives that we offer. You can be an individual member and count on several initiatives from our community to develop your career as a transformation agent. You can have your company being a sponsor of the Institute and having your brand on all our communication vehicles. Anyone can connect with our community in Brazil. You just need to feel a connection with our dream of helping organizations and people. Everything else we will discover and overcome together. Our community in Brazil is with open arms for you, wherever your interest is. To learn more about the Business Agility Institute in Brazil, visit our website.
Great.
Cynthia, and everybody that is listening to us right now. So more than sharing who we are and what our dream is, this is an invitation for everybody to join us. So we have an aspiration to really help the next generation of organizations, and we do believe in emergent, approach and bringing people together and working with stories. And this is why you were invited to talk about this with us today. So a few days ago, we had a wonderful conversation with Ian McDonald about Kneffin and Dave Snowden as well. So, and we do believe that new approach need to be brought to organizations, so traditional approach and the way we have been doing things as of today have proven it themselves that they do not help much, even if we are looking for results, business results, which is the primary purpose of this community. We need to look for other way to do things, right? So, okay, so once again, thank you so much, Cynthia. I'll turn it over to you so you can introduce yourself and let people here in Brazil know about you and your moment. We know you are right now writing a new book, so tell us a little bit more about you and we can start the conversation.
Okay, let's see, very quickly. I started out as a biologist, studying evolutionary biology and animal behavior. And then I switched to, well, I just started writing software. So I did that for a while. And then I kind of accidentally took this job at IBM Research in a group that was studying stories in organizations. And I didn't even know what that meant, but it was a job. So it turned out that it was actually quite related to animal behavior and evolutionary biology. And so I kind of slid into sort of a sociological thing sideways. So I've been doing that for like 21 years now.
Oh.
So studying organizational and community narrative, the way stories move around in organizations, communities, and society. But I studied complexity back in graduate school as a biologist. And so I kind of was still interested in that. So it's been kind of part of that work all this time too. So this book is just 20 years, no, 30 years of thinking about complexity and just sort of finally getting it out there, you know, finishing it. So, oh, and my previous book is called Working with Stories. And if you look at workingwithstories.org, you can see the book there, and you can actually read the whole book there if people want to.
Yeah, I already read this one. Yeah, wonderful.
Oh, okay. Okay. So that's it.
All right, so let's start this conversation talking a little bit about complexity. Then we can move to stories topic. So since you have you know, a biologist background and you studied complexity, I can imagine that you went very deeply in the topic. So what is the primary difference, Cynthia, between complex systems that you have studied in biology and in you know, other kinds of complex systems, and human complex systems, so social systems? So what is the key difference between those kind of complexities?
Well, I would say that when I was first studying complexity, it was really kind of pure complexity, pure self-organization, because the organisms I was studying, whether they were real or simulated, were not capable of doing the things we do. It's because as soon as you start getting up into the primates and a few other mammals, you start to get organization, which means like not just reacting to local things, but reacting to global patterns and trying to control global patterns. And yeah, I'm on the phone. Okay. Sorry.
No problem.
I must have told him that. Anyway, oh, okay, all right, okay, organization. And so one of the things that's really different between people and, say, I don't know, ants, is that ants don't say, hey, let's all do this. They can't. It's not really that. I mean, they have pheromones and things, so there's a kind of a, but people can kind of attempt to control overall patterns, global patterns. And everybody can. Every human being can do that, right? They can say, well, I don't know what's, I don't like that sign. I'm going to ignore that sign. I'm going to put up my own sign. They can, and so when you're talking about people, it's never just self-organization. There's always some, what I call organization mixed in. And so what I'm interested in is, how do those things influence each other? How do they blend together? And, in the new talking about self-organization and complexity, people talk about it like it's all by itself. But if you're talking about people, it's never all by itself. Right. So that's kind of my shtick, is let's talk about how they blend together. And that's what my work has been on that. And it really, to some extent, the reason I have that shtick is because I came from biology and then started studying humans and said, well, this is really different, and you can't treat it like that. You can't say this is how sand grains work and then this is how people work, because it really is different. So that's
yeah, that's very interesting. So what you are saying is that people really highly influence the environment that they are on. And another thing that you were saying is that language is very important when we talk about human complexity, right? Because it's because of our ability to communicate to each other and to build things together. This is what makes our complexity different. Is my understanding right?
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Is that you can't, as soon as you get a group of people together, forget pure self-organization. It's just not going to happen. There's going to be somebody who's looking further and trying to do more. And in fact, if most people are doing that.
Yeah, that's and this is what, direct us to the other topic, which is the ability to tell stories to each other. And this is why stories are so important, right, Cynthia? Uh, the stories are really what can help us make sense about what is this complexity we are on, right? So let's talk a little bit about stories and how can we work with stories to help organization. So why, in your opinion, working with stories is a good way of helping organization? Assuming that organizations are a complex system made of people. So why stories?
Well, I think working with stories is a lot like working with breathing, because they're both things that we're already doing. So when you do meditation or yoga or something, you pay attention to your breathing and you kind of use it as a vehicle to do, help you feel better and things, right? And the same thing is true with stories. Any group of people is going to share stories. That's just how people talk to each other. We've been doing it for who knows how many tens of thousands of years. And since every group, every organization, every community, every society is doing this, and we use telling and listening to stories as a way to negotiate truth, since we're doing it already, if we pay attention to it, then we can both benefit from it and sort of shape it, right? And use it to regulate. Like if you learn how to meditate and regulate your breathing, you can pull down your what's it called, the part of your nervous system that has the fight or flight response. Is it parasympathetic? Whatever it is, the thing that you don't know it, but you're freaking out, when you regulate your breathing, you can improve your regulation of your state, right? The same thing is true in a society or an organization. If you regulate your storytelling, story sharing, and you can't regulate something if you don't understand it, right? In order to regulate your breath, you have to have an awareness of your breath. So the same thing is true for stories. If you don't know what stories are being told and passed around in the organization, it's like you're unaware of your breathing. You can't work with it to improve things until you become aware of it. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense, and it's wonderful listening to you. It makes a lot of sense to me. So, and it looks like that there are many organizations that people are not aware, right, about the environment that they are on, and how can we improve together if we do not make sense of this together, right? So it makes perfectly sense to me, Cynthia. So you have developed an approach to work with stories, right? Which is called P&A. So tell us a little bit about P&A. So what is it about? How is the process of working with P&A, and how can we benefit from it?
Well, it's
P&I. I'm sorry, it's P&I, right? Participatory narrative inquiry, right?
Inquiry, yeah. Although I should have chosen a different word, because it's inquiry in the US and enquiry a lot of other places with an E, So anyway, well, generally it's that same thing. It's becoming aware of the stories that you're sharing, helping people to share stories, helping them to have permission to do it, because people often believe they don't have permission and they kind of sneak it in, around the edges. But when you actually allow people to do it and encourage them to do it, it changes everything. So, when you do story work in organizations, you learn about the organization, but it's also an intervention in that you've given people permission. So that every project you learn something, but you also change the organization because it becomes okay to talk about things, to tell each other stories about things. And you can actually change the culture of the organization so that it becomes part of the work you do to have these. And one of the things in Agile, right, is the retrospective. And so that is an aspect of sort of working in this way of sharing knowledge and understanding into the way we work together. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did. Yeah. You mentioned about culture. So in agile communities, culture is something that people, discuss a lot, to talk a lot, and actually sometimes people blame the culture because I can't. This organization can't be an agile organization because the culture doesn't allow this organization to be, and that this is ongoing conversation. And so how do you see culture in everything we are talking about right now? So how can we influence culture? How can working with stories can help building better cultures within organizations? So what is your opinion about this?
Are you saying culture?
Culture, yeah.
Okay. Well, I do think that all organizations share stories and have story sharing cultures, but some are healthier than others. So I think I have a thing in my book where I talk, it's an assessment test where you try to figure out how strong, how healthy is the story sharing culture in my organization or my community. And you go out and you observe people, and then you answer these questions and you say things like, are people allowed to tell, say, a story about a mistake? Do they feel comfortable saying that, or do they hold that back? Or do people attack them if they tell a story about a mistake? And I don't remember all the questions, but it's things like that. So there are things that people who want to foster that kind of culture can do to make those things happen more.
Yeah, it makes sense. So culture is something that it's in movement. It's changing all the time. So as long as we can influence it and we can help people being aware of their stories and their environment and giving more freedom for them to see themselves, right? To tell who they are and what is really happening. So I think that this is the best way we can help influence for the organization to build a better culture, right? So I believe that an organization is reflects what an organization is, the stories that people tell about the organization, right? So if they are telling the same story today and 1 year ahead, or telling and complaining about the same thing, it means that no progress has been made, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And, can I say something about sometimes people, when I say things like, you need to have a healthy story sharing culture, they think it means something like, oh, people should have more fun, or, it's not fun is a good thing, but it's not just about having fun at work. It's instrumental. It's serious. So, sometimes people say, oh, stories, that's cute. What do you mean, fairy tales? No, I mean, like, some of the stories that people are sharing could be really sad or really important, or you know what I mean? It's not just having, candy at lunch or something. You know what I mean? It's more serious than that. And it's not just frosting on the cake. It's something very important that can have a huge difference into the way a company operates, that people feel like they can say, for example, we screwed up and we need some help. And when you feel like you're allowed to do that, then it changes the way people help each other. It changes the way you recover from mistakes. It changes the way that people are able to predict mistakes, right? And say, oh, you know, remember this time when this happened. If there's no shared memory, it's harder to be resilient and agile, actually.
Right. If we don't do that, there's no, you know, collective environment, right? So we do not build that. Yeah. So let me ask a question to you related about the way you have been doing that in organization. So in PNI, there is a very simple process. I think you put it together, right? And the first step is collecting stories, right? And then making sense of those stories. And then you can, you know, return that to people, and then you can start creating this awareness about where they live and who they are, and etc. So how do you do that, Cynthia? So how have you been doing that? So what sense making is really about? How can you help people making sense of their stories? Cynthia, you listen to me?
The book that I wrote, it's like 650 pages. That's my fault. That doesn't have anything to do with, can you hear me okay?
Yes, now I can. Yeah,
okay.
Now it's okay.
Okay. I noticed it was having a problem. Anyway, they think that it's a big thing, that you have to do big projects, but it isn't. You can start with 1 hour and 4 people in a room, or over Zoom, I should say. So, you know, you can have a PNI project that is so tiny that no one even knows it happened, right? It can be you're having lunch and you have a conversation. They don't even know you just did a project. That's how small the intervention can be. And then as you get more used to it, and I've done that, I've actually done it. I've just stuck it into conversations to try out new ideas and things like that. You know, just saying like, well, let's see if I can get this person to tell me a story, you know, about something. So the whole aspect of sharing stories, talking about the stories, making sense of them, it can get down to this tiny little kernel, but it can also expand up to, you know, 100,000 people over 10 years. That works too. So you know, I always suggest that people start very small. Just try it in an hour and just play with it and see what happens. And then, you know, as you get more comfortable with it, you start doing more and more, and then you grow your projects. And usually when people are disappointed with this kind of work, it's because they start too big. They say, well, we'll just take care of this, you know, and it's too much, too fast, and they needed to start smaller and get their feet under them.
Right. And for people that want to start, you know, helping organizations, working with stories, so what would be your recommendation? So what are the abilities that those people need? What they do need to study? Because this is something very different from traditional approach, right? When you have, you know, step by step and tell people what to do. So this is something that you give a space for people to tell the stories. So what is your recommendation for people that want to become facilitators in this kind of work?
Well, I mean, if you were someone like me, I would say read my book, because I love reading. But a lot of people don't learn so well by reading. And so in that case, it's better to, I would suggest, I mean, since I have no videos, because I'm not very good at making videos, I would suggest read a little bit, try a little bit. Like at the end of each chapter of my book, I have these little exercises people can do, and nobody's going to do them probably, but you know, people could try. They're like little tiny things that take a short amount of time that you can then go out and try. So if you are sort of learning as you go and learning by doing, then you're going to build up your own understanding of it. And eventually you won't need any books. You'll just get it, right? So that's what I suggest to people usually, is that they just start doing it. Start with a little nugget of how does it work when people still share stories and conversations. Like one thing that I suggest people to do is go into well, it's a little hard to do right now, but normally I say go to a public cafe, right? And just listen to conversations,
Right.
overhear conversations, and get used to going, oh, that's a story right there. And then say, oh, that's how that person responded to that story. And once you sort of learn how it works, the conversational flow of storytelling, you hear it everywhere. So you can also see it on the internet in discussions. You can see people telling stories and you can see the flow of things that way too. It's not as easy as in regular conversation, but I think that's the best way. Oh, and I would suggest one other thing is have a partner.
Right.
So
right,
if you're, say you have another person or 2 or 3 people and you're doing this together, you can use each other to learn. You can have a conversation where you share stories back and forth and you go, hey, you just told a story or whatever. And you can then go out and try experiments and then come back. So if you have like a study group, you can learn together. So I think that's my best suggestion.
Yeah. In my personal opinion, I have read your book with working with stories, and it has helped me a lot. So at the end of each chapter, as you said, there are a couple of exercises, and you can, reflect about the way you were doing, and read and doing. Since this is the way I like to do, so I do something and I read something. So it's excellent. And you mentioned to me that you are working on a sense making tool, right?
Mm-hmm.
So tell us about this tool. And I think you are also writing a new book. Is that right? Right now?
Yeah, the book is about the tool.
The tool. Okay.
So it is the tool. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. So share with us a little bit about this tool and how this tool is going to help in sense making. And I think it's all related with helping people making better decisions, right? So,
Yes.
So just share with us a little bit about the new tool.
Well, this thing started in 2001. But I was working with Dave Snowden on the Cynefin framework, and basically I didn't get his thing. And so I said, I don't understand what you're talking about. I'm going to go away and make my own thing. And so I did. And then I showed it to him and he said, well, your thing is my thing. Only I had it flipped around. And so we kind of married them for a while. And then we published a paper where they were kind of sitting side by side. And then eventually I realized that they weren't really exactly the same thing. And that, but here's an interesting thing though, because when we used to give talks together and things like that, and I always found that when they didn't understand his thing, they would understand my thing and vice versa. So that's where I got my thing I say all the time, which is that every mind has its models and every model has its minds, right? So the fact that there are so many different frameworks and models to work with complexity is a really good thing, because we have all this diversity of the way our brains work. So, certain things are going to work better for some people and not so well for other people. And so for whatever reason, this is the way I think about it.
Right.
And so that was the first part of it. And then in around 2010, I started realizing that there were other aspects of it. So, and I call it a thinking space. So it's like a 2-dimensional space. And the exercise is that you put things on the space and then you look for patterns in the things you're putting, generally situations. It's a, general sense making clustering type exercise thing. So it expanded into 5 spaces in 2010. And then last summer, I suddenly decided it was time to work on it again. And now it's at 7 spaces. So, and I'm just now writing the last chapter of the book, and I'm hoping to have it done this year or very soon after. And I'm really excited to get it out and move on. So,
Right.
but you know, it's essentially, it's a game, is what it really is. It's a game that you play in a group, and the game is supposed to help you think about a topic together, something like education or healthcare or something that you're interested in that you're working on together. And you're supposed to come out of it with better understanding of it. So, and the book is basically just to explain how to play the game, sort of.
Oh, that's wonderful. So when is the book is going to be published?
Well, I hope in February, probably.
Oh.
I'm having a lot of people read it and give me comments, because I'd rather get the comments from them than from the reviewers on the Amazon page. So I'm going to try to, I have a list of people, and they're going to read it, and going to try and tweak it, clean it up, you know.
Okay, wonderful. And I'm very curious about, you know, this new book and the tools. So just for us to have an understanding about, you mentioned 7 spaces, right? So people here know a lot about Kinefin. So Kinefin, from Dave's know that you have been working together. So there are 5 domains, right? The clear, the complicated, the complex, the chaotic, and the confusion. So in Confluence, are you building or creating new domains, different domains, or the domains are the same as in Kinefin? So how Confluence domains relate to Kinefin domains, or it's a different organization? So just for us to understand.
It's a different organization. I don't think they really relate. The main thing for Confluence, which is, some people might remember it from the an early paper, but essentially the way that makes sense to me to think about it is that I place the degree of self-organization on one axis. So it's a continuous gradient, right? So something that's extremely self-organized would be like a beehive, right?
Oh.
And then if it ticks back from that to something like a gas where things are very spread apart, right? And then on the other axis, you have the degree of organization. So like a city hall is a fairly organized activity, right? Or a set of rules or a blueprint that's very organized. And since those 2 axes are orthogonal to each other, you can have mixtures, all possible mixtures of those 2 forces in a situation. And so it's a kind of a blending. I'm interested in the blending of those 2 forces. And so the 7 spaces, the first space is that, it's just those 2 dimensions, the degree of organization, the degree of self-organization, and all the other spaces are nested inside of it. So they are for thinking about, for example, there's one called the mix, which is where both of them are strong and they're kind of like going at each other. I'm working on one now called the void, where they're both weak. So that's a situation where there's kind of like it's not clear what's going on. It's really hard to say what the things are. But none of these things are domains. They're all just exercises.
Right.
So they're all ways of looking at reality, the ways of thinking about stuff. I don't have any kind of bounded domains.
Right.
It's just an open space.
Yeah. So it's a different logic behind that.
Yeah, and you know, it probably comes from being trained as a biologist, where everything's a graph, right? And everything's numerical. So, and everything's a range or a variance. So I don't think in bins, I think in ranges. So, you know, for people who that does something for them, then this might help them. And for people who don't think that way, well, they should use something else. So.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Perfect. Okay. And Cynthia, what are the main challenges that I know you are someone that have been working, with stories and complexity for, things a lot of time ago. So what are the main challenges that you have faced trying to help organizations work with stories and, you know, becoming awareness about their reality? So can you share a real experience that, you know, is really, you know, that come up in your mind and this was really challenging to me?
I would say the biggest difficulty is that, no, there's two. I'll think of two difficulties. One is that it takes courage. That so many times that people have come to me and said, we want to do this project and we want to find out, you know, what everyone has to say. We want to find out what their experiences have been, but then they kind of don't really want to. You know, it's kind of difficult to listen to what people really have to say and what's actually happened to them and their perspective on what's happened to them. So that, you know, people will they will sabotage their own projects without necessarily even knowing they're doing it. So as a consultant, it's kind of my job to help them get what they need, which sometimes conflicts with what they want. So that can be a challenge. And there have been projects there was one project I can think of that was for a major corporation, and it was going really, really well. And all this stuff was coming out and people were discussing all these amazing things. And someone high up in the organization found out about it and said, no, turn that off. They didn't want people making sense of the organization because they didn't have control of it. And so the whole project just ground to a halt overnight. And that was it. It was gone forever. So it's difficult to, the organization has to be open to hearing what they're going to hear. So the second difficulty is that somehow people seem to get the idea that because it's stories, that it's somehow magic. And then some people have the idea that magic is easy. Magic was never easy, was it? I mean, if you look at all the old folk tales, magic is never easy. It's just magical, right? But so they start doing it and they say, oh, but we have to like ask all these people to tell stories and it's hard to get people to do it. Can you hear me? Am I okay?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. It says unstable. Yeah. Oh, and, you know, and it's not magic. It still takes time. It takes effort. People don't want to participate. You have to, you know, I mean, I've been on a lot of projects where we say, well, we'll get 200 people to tell us stories. Well, you can't just snap your fingers and get 200 people to do something. It sometimes takes many weeks of asking over and over again, saying, please. There are techniques you can use to bring up the participation, but it's worth doing, but that doesn't mean it's effortless. So I think that's the other thing that people expect it to be easier than it is.
Yeah, and you mentioned two words that make a lot of sense to me. So it needs courage, right? Because when you let people making sense and being aware about the environment that they are on, this can be dangerous, right? For some people, you know. And another word that you mentioned is that you have less control, right? Because when people don't know and they are not aware about who they are, about the environment that they are in, it's easier to control, right? When you give people freedom to think, it's harder to control. So yeah, this is very interesting, Cynthia. And maybe one thing, I'm not sure if this was a challenge to you, what about collecting the stories and, you know, looking for patterns on those stories? Is this a challenge, or I know you have a tool, right, to help with that, but I think that maybe this is a challenge, you know, to together all different stories and look for patterns that help organizations really understand their complexity, right? So what about that?
Well, I think that's actually the easier problem.
Oh, really?
Yes, because you can just throw money and people at that. But you can't throw money at getting people to tell stories. And you can't throw money at getting to people to tell stories that have meaning to them. Those difficulties are harder. So like if people don't trust you, it takes extra work to get, people will tell you camouflage stories, I call them, where they, that's one of the dangers in this work, is that we don't say, tell me what happened when exactly this experience was had. We say, what was the best time you had at work in the last year? Or tell us about a time when you had a hard time dragging yourself into work. You're giving them the freedom to choose whatever story they think matters, right? That's hard to get, because people will often say, I don't believe that you really want to hear that. So they'll tell you some safe story. And then you think you found out things, but you haven't even scratched the surface, right? So the issue of like software and dealing with the data and analysis, that's nothing. You can just hire an analyst. I mean, the software, and yes, I have open source software that helps with this, but you can use a lot of different kinds of software. I mean, it's just, you can use a spreadsheet. That's not the hurdle. The hurdle is people stuff.
Right.
But that's one of the things that people learn, is like, you learn how to do it. You learn how to communicate to people that we really want to hear. That's the hardest thing I've found, is that you say to people, we really want to hear what you have to say. And you have to refine that so that they believe you. Because at first they might not believe you. I don't know how many people I've seen where I've been at a workshop or something, and I say, so we want to think about this issue. We want to talk to each other. We want to find out what's really going on. We want to get to the heart of things. And what I find is that it's always in the last 1/4 of the time. People do a lot of face saving up front. They'll tell all these safe stories, about, my best day at work, But then when you get through that and they start feeling more comfortable, then the real meat of the thing comes out. And then you get the really useful discussions. And it's getting through to that. That's the important thing.
Right. Yeah, it makes totally sense, Cynthia. And you know what? As I have mentioned in the beginning of our conversation, we are a business agility community, right? And the question that we raise in our community is, what really brings agility to business? And for me, what really brings agility to business is exactly what we are talking about here right now. So it's really connecting people. It's really letting people becoming aware and creating a collective, knowledge and thinking and awareness. So this is what makes an organization more agile in business than other organizations. So, and this is interesting because a lot of people in agile communities really try to bring agility in a prescriptive way of doing things. Let's do that step by step. You are going to scale agility like this. You do that, and you do that, and you do that. So, this really doesn't make sense to me. For me, business agility is connected with everything you were sharing with us today. So, helping people tell stories, connecting people as much as you can, so they can help business becoming more agile. I don't know if this makes sense to you, but I'd like to make this connection since we are, starting the end of our conversation, and I would like to connect all this conversation with the main topic of our community, which is business agility. So how do you see this, I mean, I am sharing with you my perspective, but I'd like to hear yours about this connection.
Well, I would say that an agile, if you think of an agile animal, say, right, and it's dodging, it's weaving, it's jumping over this, right? Now pretend that that agile animal is actually a group of animals, right? And it's so closely coordinated that it looks like one animal, right?
Right. Perfect.
How did it get there? Well, because it has this resilience, because it has these elastic connections, right, that fit between all the parts. And one of the ways that humans create those connections, those resilient connections, is by sharing stories with each other.
Right. Yeah.
It's a way of sharing more deeply our experiences, our perspectives, our values, so that we have each other's backs. Obviously not perfectly, right? But it's a step closer than if we never are allowed to share stories about anything.
Yeah, and this is the way we connect our feelings, right, Cynthia? Because you know, when it's exactly what you said. When you go deeply on those stories, you bring vulnerability, right? And you connect feelings. So before we start, you know, I really want you to being willing to do things together, because they trust increase and everything that connect people starts increasing within organization, and people start working as they as if they were one, as you said, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, I love it. That, yeah. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for for this contribution here, for this conversation. I am very excited because I really see that the way I think related with business agility. You are confirming, right, based on your experience, your knowledge, and everything, that this is what makes sense. It's not easy, as you said, right? It's much easier to bring a framework and a step-by-step orientation and tell people, hey, do that, you're going to become agile. It's easier, right? But this is not what we believe. This is not the way we think that will really help creating the next generation of organizations, right? Based on people, with focus on people, bringing people to the center of everything we do.
Yeah, and I feel like that sometimes people say, well, don't be a person at work, right? Because we don't want those
Right.
messy parts, right? But those messy parts are extremely valuable, and they can give you all this, return on investment, really. And so I guess people don't see the value in that sometimes, but they can be surprised by how valuable it is, I think.
Yeah, wonderful, Cynthia. So we still have 10 minutes, and unfortunately, we are very close, to finish our conversation. I just would like, to ask you to share with everyone that is listening to us, and all people that will see this video later. Just share with us, some advice based on your experience working with organizations, everything you have, passed through. So if you have to say something to people that want to help creating the next generation of organizations, based on working with stories, based on really helping people becoming aware of their complexity, of their environment. So what would you say? What recommendations would you give? So what is really important? What people can't miss in this process?
I feel like I already gave a lot of advice.
Oh,
I
you
don't know
did
if I,
already, yeah. But
yeah.
I'm just asking you about, things that come up to your mind that you can say, hey, don't miss that. Don't do that way. If you do that way, maybe you are gonna create resistance. Maybe, I mean, some experiences that you have, went through, that you would recommend that people avoid, or that people really do this way because it's gonna work?
I think there is a kind of a really huge infrastructure on the business storytelling side, the storytelling stuff. And if you get into that stuff, there's a lot about how to use stories to get people right where you want them, right? And if you slide into that, it can become, it's very dangerous because you start trying to manipulate people with stories. And so I don't think that works.
Right.
I think
Yeah.
if you want to empower people in an organization to do things with stories, it has to be participatory, because the blowback from attempted manipulation with stories is invisible and devastating. So, you know, you think that you've convinced everybody of something because you've done this campaign and you've done all this thing, and the rebellion is invisible, and it can be, well, if you actually are listening to people, then you can still do a campaign, but it will be a grounded campaign. It will be a campaign that comes sort of with the consent of the governed, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So it's not like you can't tell a story or do a campaign or have a mission statement or anything like that. It's not like you can't do it. It's just that if you're doing it with the people and with their participation, it's going to be a win-win, right?
Right.
A lot of times people don't want to do that. They want to be like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to roll out this new paradigm, da, 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 da. But they never ask anybody, how do you see that? You know, how does this appear to you? How does this fit into your story?
Right.
And if you do that, well, you'll learn a lot. So, I mean, I think that's one of the dangers. I mean, pretty much everybody I know who works in stories started out, I call it on the telling side, right? I did. I was on that side. I was like, oh, wow, I'm going to tell this perfect story and I'm going to teach people everything and convince people of things. And boy, was I wrong, because it really doesn't work. Well, it can seem to work that way, but your victory is shallow and short-lived, and your defeat is deep and long, right? So
Right.
when you do something that's more participatory, it's just the first time you see that happen, you realize how ridiculous it is to try to control people by telling them a story. You realize the power of giving people the right to exchange stories and build this whole sort of ecology of stories, as
Yeah.
opposed to, you know, a park of stories.
Yeah, and this requires experience, right, Cynthia? So you had to learn that. So you did it
Oh yeah.
wrong, and then you learn it, you know, because actually convincing people, controlling people is, you know, it's most people actually start doing things this way until you realize that this is not the best way, you know, to handle this. So you need to open space for others to tell what is important to them, right? So your job is, you know, open the space, right? And let
Well,
people.
telling a story. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. No, go ahead, please.
Telling a story is very attractive. It
Right.
seems like, you know, I was saying, like magic. It doesn't work as well as it seems like it will. It's
Yeah.
just much more powerful to listen and to connect people. And it does take some experience to do that. And I think that you can actually demonstrate to yourself how powerful it is by just doing the minimal exercise where you get a bunch of people in a room and you work through some experiences and you get them to open up. And you come away humbled, because the things you thought you knew and were going to communicate, they're never as good as the things that people have in their own experiences. They're just
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can practice that anywhere, right? It doesn't need to be within a form organization. So people tell stories everywhere, right? So you can start practicing that. Yeah.
You
And
could
this
do it
is
in your own family.
right.
For example, one of the things that I've worked on in years is this board game. I don't know where I have it here, but it's like a card game for sharing stories. And I've forced my husband and son to play it with me like 10 or 12 times as I developed it. every single time we found out stuff that we didn't know about each other. And we've been married almost 30 years. But every time I'm like, you never told me that. And he's like, I didn't know that about you. And so it's an endless font of discovery, just telling people's stories back and forth. So yeah, it is humbling.
Yeah, and it's really powerful, right? It's really powerful. So I'm really grateful for you for this conversation today, because this is something we believe here. And I think Business Agility Institute here in Brazil is, trying to help people becoming aware of this, about the importance of this, of everything that we are talking about here. And this is really what can, help business. So the traditional way of doing things, and, what, the industry revolution brought to us, and, step by step, this is not helpful at all in complexity, right? So Cynthia,
Well, it is, and it's partially useful. I don't feel
it's partially useful. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. All right, Cynthia. So we still have 2 minutes. So I just would like to thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. You really helped our community here in Brazil. This video will be seen by a lot of people, I'm sure, because this is really, a subject that interests a lot of people here. So before we close our conversation, I just would like to share some information with our participants here related with our future events, and then we can close our conversation and we can let you go. So it's real quick. Let me just share the events that we still have until the end of the year. I don't know if, can you listen to me? Okay, so we have, tomorrow we'll have an event with Esther Derby. We'll be talking about retrospective and organization feedback loop with her. On December 8th, we will talk about metrics with Rafael Albino. Rafael is a Brazilian and very knowledgeable about metrics and the way we use this topic within organization. And lastly, on December 15th, we will talk about collaborative games with Arthur Berberian. It's another guest of us here in the Business Agility Institute Brazil. So I will share with you in the chat some links about our Slack, our LinkedIn page, and we do ask you to respond to our survey. So everybody that will respond to our survey will receive the record of this conversation with Cynthia. So please do it. It helps us, improving our events, our future events, and knowing how was your experience with us. So Cynthia, once again, thank you so much. I hope we can get together in 2001 and, have more conversations related with what you were doing, the way you were helping the world and organization. So this is really exciting topic. And I also would like to wish you a Merry Christmas, a happy 2021. And all the best luck with your new book and your new tool.
Well, thank you so much. And thanks for having me on here. It's been nice to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye. See you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.